But first, last night on ABC's Q&A program, one of the audience members asked a question about multiculturalism that was swiftly labelled as blatantly racist. You judge for yourself.
My children, now almost 30 and 34, went to the local state public school and were dictated to that multiculturalism is a great thing. I don't believe it is, as I feel that the culture of the original British/Irish majority has been demonised constantly for the last 3 decades. Case in point, frequent vandalism of memorials to Captain Cook. How does democracy fit into this atmosphere of beat up the white guy?
So to discuss this and more, Sky News contributor Chris Uhlmann. Well, I have to say I agree with her, Chris, on those points about the desecration of monuments. Surely it helps to have open, frank conversations about some of these difficult issues and questions, as that woman poses, that the pendulum has swung too far, rather than shout people down as racists. You've been at the ABC. How do you see it?
Well, Peter, I certainly agree that that's not a racist question. It's not racist to question government policy, and it might be bipartisan policy. It certainly is. But people have a right, if they want, to question government policies and to do so in a robust way. I've always supported that kind of free speech. That woman's expressing a point of view that I think quite a few people might express in the community. It is wise, I think, to have debates about these things. I don't think, though, that she needs to look to the local immigrant community for people who are vandalising statues, though, Peter. She might go to the local humanities department to do that. One of the things I fear about what's happened to our society is that culture that she's talking about, which came from our British heritage, which is there, which can't be denied, allowed the kind of society which was open enough to open its borders after the Second World War in particular and take a vast number of people from a vast number of places and to do so peacefully. And I don't think that people do get credit for that. The host population never gets any credit for that, nor do the institutions which allow that. And at the moment, there are some who would rip up every flagstone of our civilization. And I certainly feel very hostile towards that point worldview. Now, I don't disagree with people's right to want to even think that in Australia, but we should look at where the right to do those things comes from, and where the right to do those things comes from are the institutions that were set up by the British, and that's part of our heritage. And the currency lads and lasses, of which that woman is one, so the Australian born who were part of that community, sometimes can feel very left out of these conversations.
And as she says, rightly demonised, or wrongly demonised, I should say. Last week, we talked about this ridiculous notion that sympathy or rhetorical support for Hamas isn't necessarily a deal breaker when it comes to applying for a visa to Australia. Now, it clearly struck a nerve. John Howard today weighing in, telling Greg Sheridan, where you've got a body that's a declared terrorist organisation, he says, I don't think for a moment that someone who has declared support for that organisation should come to Australia. He was also incredulous that Labor hasn't cleared up this mess. Now, I'm with him on this, Chris. The government's let this hang out there for a number of weeks now. And that says to me, if they haven't shut it down, if they haven't said this is some sort of overreach from the ASIO chief, this must clearly be government policy.
Yeah, and I think, again, I would make a distinction between the things that people think and the things that people do. I would suspect, though, that if you declared support for Hamas during an immigration interview with any official and you're coming to Australia and you're coming from that part of the world, there'd be more than one question after that, Peter. I doubt very much that question should be left to hang. And interestingly enough, I note that a Guardian poll, an essential poll, finds that 44% of Australians agree with Peter Dutton on having a pause from immigration for that part of the world. So Peter Dutton knew what he was doing when he said it, because he was going to get a head nod from a lot of people because of the nature of that conflict and how fierce it is. There would be a concern that people are radicalised. Now, those people also are clearly refugees, so the world does have to deal with them, and Australia has always been generous on that front. But I certainly understand the sentiments of people who think that they shouldn't come. And again, I think that it's a debate that's worth having, and it's a debate that's being very badly handled by the government. Again, one of the things that we see with this government, it is very flat-footed when it comes to responding to these kinds of things. I know that you've spoken in the past about the fix that you had in terms of during the Howard government years on the kind of way that you could deal with people like this. And I don't think they've done a good job with that.
What did you make of the attack in Germany over the weekend? 3 dead, 8 injured, Syrian refugee now confessing to the murders. ISIS, Islamic State's claimed responsibility. And it's now set off a massive new debate in Germany about migration. A lot of frustration at the Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. He is now saying he wants to question the government's asylum policy. There are some upcoming elections in Germany. The far right is gaining ground. Europe's a tinderbox. We saw obviously a synagogue torched in France, a bloke wearing a Palestinian flag as he fled the building. This is the result of not dealing with these issues transparently and with safety at the forefront rather than hand-wringing faux humanitarianism.
Yeah, Peter, I could not believe back in 2016 that Angela Merkel allowed 1 million people to come across her borders in 1 year. Her slogan then was, "We can handle this." And I thought at the time it's going to be very difficult to handle over a long period of time because you can't allow that kind of mass immigration and imagine that there's not going to be any reaction inside the community. I mean, and the more I look at Angela Merkel as a leader of Germany, I think that she was disastrous. If you get defence policy wrong and immigration policy wrong and energy policy wrong, there's really not much left in terms of being a national leader. And I would say that in terms of the way that she was trying to deal with Russia, in the way that she allowed her country to be dependent on Russian gas because she set up an energy system that didn't work without it, and 1 million people marched across the borders, I think it's time for a big re-evaluation of her as a chancellor. And you're right. What happens is it does fan voices of discontent inside the community, and the more examples that, they'll take any example. Again, you can't demonise an entire immigrant population because of the actions of 1 or 2 people. However, you can understand the rage that comes from the community when they're asked to deal with such a wrenching population change in such a short period of time. It was always going to be a difficult thing to manage.
And in Germany, like these visas to Gazans in Australia, they're not disclosed, they're not put to a vote, people don't get a say. And I think that the agency being stripped away from voters in a democracy is also fueling the anger.
Yeah, Peter, I think that, again, we have to have open debates about these things. It is reasonable for people if they see that their society is under assault. And again, I don't know that it's always under assault from the immigrants. I think it's under assault from the local humanities department at the university. I think that's where a lot of these really, really bad ideas are coming from when you talk about the denigration of our past. I think we have an interesting past. I think we have a difficult past. I think we should discuss it and come and reconcile with it. But I think that we should keep those things which are a good part of it. Now, what we're seeing is the dismantling of those ideas by people who offer us nothing in return. They make a wasteland and call this progress, some of these people. So I genuinely think that the only way to deal with this in the kind of society that we have is by being really robust in the debates that we have. And the woman that we saw at the beginning of this program has serious questions in her own mind about multiculturalism as a policy. Other people have questions about immigration. It is not racist to raise these things, nor should people be surprised when they feel like there is a group in their society, and as I say, not always immigrants, but those who essentially are constantly denigrating the lives that they lead and the history that they have. Everyone in Australia has a right to be proud of their particular history. And I'm proud of the Germans and the Irish Catholics that are part of mine. They are what I would call the currency lads and lasses who occupied this country before the Second World War. There are a lot of problems with them. But boy, they set up a society which was so profoundly welcoming that it allowed great changes to a society in the course of my lifetime. Australia's changed very much. And I think those people deserve some credit.
Massive credit. We are the envy of the world, Chris, and I will not be embarrassed about our history. I'm not Pollyanna. I don't look at it with rose-coloured glasses. But yes, there are difficult patches, but we are incredibly resilient and we have so much to be proud of. And, John Howard called it the black armband view of history. I think it's that more these days.